You're walking through a grocery store on a random Tuesday afternoon. The fluorescent lights hum overhead. You're thinking about what to make for dinner. And then, without warning, you smell it. A specific cologne. Or maybe it's a particular brand of shampoo. And suddenly they're there. Not physically, but in your mind so vividly it feels like they're standing right behind you. Your ex-girlfriend from 5 years ago. Your childhood best friend who moved away. Your grandfather who passed when you were 12. For a split second your heart races. Your breath catches. You turn around even though you know they're not there. And then the moment passes. You're alone again in the cereal aisle. But for the rest of the day, maybe the rest of the week, they linger. Conversations you had. Moments you shared. Things you never said. They're gone from your life, but somehow they never left your head. Here's the unsettling truth. Your brain is holding hostages. People who have exited your life, through breakups, distance, death, or simple drift, continue to occupy neural real estate in your mind. They show up uninvited in your dreams. They influence decisions you make today. They shape who you're becoming even in their absence. But why? Why does your brain refuse to let go? Why do some people haunt you for years while others fade in weeks? And most disturbingly, what if the version of them living in your head isn't even real anymore? Today we're diving into the neuroscience, psychology, and evolutionary biology that explains why your brain holds on to people long after they're gone. And I'm warning you now, once you understand the mechanisms at play, you'll never think about your memories the same way again. Let's start with the most fundamental question. What happens in your brain when you form a meaningful connection with another person? Imagine meeting someone new. At first, they're just another face, processed by your fusiform face area, categorized as human, filed away with thousands of other social encounters. But then something shifts. You spend time together. You share experiences. You laugh. You cry. You trust. And while all of this is happening on a conscious level, something profound is occurring beneath your awareness. Your brain is physically changing. Every meaningful interaction triggers a cascade of neurochemicals. Oxytocin, often called the bonding hormone, floods your system during moments of trust and intimacy. It literally rewires your neural circuitry, strengthening connections between neurons associated with that person. Dopamine, your brain's reward chemical, surges when you're with them, creating powerful associations between their presence and pleasure. But here's where it gets fascinating. These aren't just temporary chemical spikes. Over time, through a process called synaptic plasticity, your brain builds dedicated neural pathways for this person. Think of it like this. The first time you walk through fresh snow, it takes effort. But walk that same path repeatedly and eventually, you create a deep, permanent trail. That's what happens with people you're close to. Your brain carves neural highways dedicated to them, storing their voice, their smell, their mannerisms, the emotional tone of your relationship, and thousands of micromemories associated with their presence. Neuroscientist Dr. James Cohn at the University of Virginia demonstrated this beautifully. In his research, he had people undergo fMRI brain scans while facing the threat of electric shock. When facing the threat alone, their brains showed intense activation in threat detection regions. But when holding a loved one's hand, even without seeing them, those threat responses dramatically decreased. The remarkable part? The effect worked even when subjects held the hand of their partner behind a curtain, without visual confirmation. Their brains had so thoroughly encoded their partner's presence that mere physical touch was enough to activate the entire neural network of safety and comfort associated with that person. Now imagine what happens when that person suddenly disappears from your life. Those neural pathways don't just vanish. That highway carved through your brain doesn't magically fill back in. Your neurons don't receive a memo that says, "Dismantle all connections related to Sarah. She moved to Portland and you'll probably never see her again." Instead, those pathways remain. And your brain, which has spent months or years efficiently processing that person through these dedicated networks, keeps trying to use them. It's like a computer program that keeps calling for a file that no longer exists, generating error messages, but never quite learning to stop looking. This is why reminders of absent people hit so hard. A song, a place, a smell. These sensory triggers activate those massive, still intact neural networks, and suddenly your entire brain lights up with their presence, even though they're nowhere near you. But the real psychological torment begins when we consider what neuroscientists call reward prediction error. When you were with this person, your brain learned to predict rewards, comfort, excitement, validation, joy, in their presence. Your dopamine neurons became exquisitely tuned to anticipate these rewards. But now they're gone, and your brain keeps making predictions that never come true. Imagine salivating every time you hear a dinner bell, except no food ever arrives. That constant mismatch between expectation and reality, that's the neurological experience of missing someone. Your brain keeps expecting them, keeps preparing for the reward of their presence, and keeps being disappointed. And disappointment, neurologically speaking, is registered as pain. Not metaphorical pain. Actual literal pain. Studies using fMRI scans have shown that social rejection and loss activate the same brain regions, the anterior cingulate cortex and the insula, that light up during physical pain. When you say your heart is broken, your brain genuinely can't tell the difference between that and a broken bone. But why would our brains evolve to create such a painful system? Why build neural architecture that causes us to suffer when people leave? To understand that, we need to look at what these relationships meant for our ancestors' survival. Here's a psychological phenomenon that will reframe every unresolved relationship in your life: the Zeigarnik Effect. In the 1920s, Russian psychologist Bluma Zeigarnik noticed something curious while sitting in a Viennese cafe. The waiters had remarkable memory for unpaid orders but immediately forgot the details of orders once they were settled. This observation led to groundbreaking research. Your mind obsesses over incomplete tasks far more than completed ones. Students remember interrupted tasks 90% better than completed ones. Your brain treats unfinished business as an open loop, a cognitive tension that demands resolution. Now apply this to relationships. Think about a relationship that ended cleanly. Maybe you had a long conversation. You both expressed your feelings. You said goodbye properly. You got closure. Sure, you probably felt sad for a while, but eventually the memory settled. The story felt complete. Now think about someone who just vanished from your life. Maybe they ghosted you. Maybe they moved away and you never said goodbye. Maybe you had a fight and never reconciled. Maybe they died suddenly and you never got to say what needed to be said. These incomplete narratives become psychological torture. Your brain doesn't just remember these relationships. It actively, compulsively processes them, trying to write an ending that was never written. You replay conversations. You imagine different scenarios. You construct hypothetical dialogues where you finally get to say your piece, or where they finally explain themselves. This is the Zeigarnik Effect in full force. Your mind has an open file for this person that it cannot close. And unlike a forgotten task, these open files are loaded with emotion, identity, and deep neural encoding. The mechanism becomes even more powerful when you consider something psychologists call intermittent reinforcement, one of the most powerful drivers of compulsive behavior. When a relationship is consistent, whether consistently good or consistently bad, your brain adapts and forms stable predictions. But when a relationship is unpredictable, when someone is sometimes present and sometimes absent, sometimes loving and sometimes distant, your brain enters a state of hypervigilance. This is why on-again, off-again relationships are so psychologically addictive. This is why you can't stop thinking about someone who gave you mixed signals. Your brain's reward system becomes hypersensitive, constantly scanning for patterns, desperately trying to predict when the next reward of their presence or affection will arrive. And when they finally leave for good, your brain doesn't accept it, because the pattern was never consistent enough to learn that it's truly over. On some level, you're still waiting for the next time they come back, because they always did before. But there's another layer to the incompleteness problem: narrative identity. Psychologist Dan McAdams argues that humans construct their sense of self through internalized life stories. You're not just a collection of traits, you're the protagonist of an ongoing narrative. And in that narrative, significant people play crucial supporting roles. When someone important exits your story without a proper conclusion, they create a narrative wound. The story doesn't make sense anymore. There's a plot thread that leads nowhere. A character who disappeared mid-arc. Your mind, which craves coherent narratives, keeps returning to these gaps, trying to make sense of them. This is why people sometimes become more present in your thoughts after they're gone than when they were in your life. Your conscious mind is desperately trying to integrate them into your life story in a way that makes sense. Consider someone whose parent died when they were young. that parent often becomes more psychologically significant across their lifetime than if they'd lived. Why? Because the narrative is incomplete. There's a massive question mark at the center of their origin story. They spend decades imagining who that parent was, what they would have said, how their presence would have changed things. The absent person becomes a ghost precisely because they're undefined. Your imagination fills the gaps, but it can never settle on a final version. And so the story remains open, the neural file remains active, and your brain keeps working on a problem it can never solve. This is the cruelest trick of human consciousness. The relationships that hurt us most are often the ones we can't finish. Let's rewind evolutionary time. Back before cities, before agriculture, before written language. You're a human living in a small band of maybe 50 to 150 individuals somewhere on the African savanna, approximately 100,000 years ago. In this environment, your survival is absolutely dependent on other people. You cannot hunt large game alone. You cannot defend against predators alone. You cannot raise children alone. You cannot even gather enough resources to survive the dry season alone. Your survival probability is directly tied to your integration within your social group. In this context, losing a significant person isn't just emotionally painful, it's potentially fatal. If your hunting partner abandons you, your caloric intake plummets. If your mate leaves, your reproductive success craters and your childcare capacity halves. If your tribe ostracizes you, you're essentially sentenced to death. Evolution, therefore, created powerful psychological mechanisms to prevent social loss. Your brain developed an intense threat detection system specifically for monitoring your social bonds. It became hypersensitive to any signs of rejection, abandonment, or social disconnection. This is why social pain uses the same neural circuitry as physical pain. From an evolutionary perspective, they're equally dangerous. A broken leg could kill you. So could a broken bond. But evolution has a cruel efficiency. It doesn't care if the mechanisms it creates cause you suffering in modern environments. It only cares if those mechanisms increased your ancestors' reproductive success. And keeping neural representations of significant people permanently active, even after they're gone, provided real advantages in ancestral environments. If your hunting partner got injured, you needed to remember them, track them, and maintain that relationship during their recovery. If a family member traveled to another tribe, you needed to maintain that bond because you might rejoin them later or they might return. If someone died, remembering them and learning from the circumstances of their death increased your own survival probability. Your brain's inability to let go made evolutionary sense when social networks were small, stable, and local. But now you live in a world where you might form deep bonds with hundreds of people across your lifetime. Where people move across continents. Where relationships end not because someone died, but because they simply don't text back anymore. Where social media allows you to watch the ongoing lives of people who are no longer in yours. Your Stone Age brain, built for a tribe of 150, is trying to process the coming and going of potentially thousands of social connections. And it's using the only strategy it knows. Hold on to everyone important. Never stop tracking them. Keep their neural networks active just in case. This is why you still think about your high school girlfriend even though you're happily married. Why you can't shake memories of a friend who betrayed you a decade ago. Why someone who broke your heart at 22 still occupies mental space when you're 45. Your brain is running software designed for a world that no longer exists. But the evolutionary story gets even more psychologically complex when we consider something anthropologists call coalitional psychology. Humans didn't just need individuals, they needed alliances. Your success wasn't just about your individual skills, it was about which coalition you belonged to. Were you in the dominant group or the subordinate one? Did people stand with you or against you? This created intense psychological machinery for tracking who's in your coalition and who's not. And crucially, for maintaining emotional investment in coalition members even when they're not physically present. If your coalition partner went to the neighboring valley for 2 weeks, you couldn't just forget about them. You needed to maintain that alliance, remember your obligations, and track the status of your relationship. You needed to keep them psychologically alive. This is the root of what we now call attachment bonds. Relationships that persist across time and distance, maintained by internal psychological representations. Attachment theory, developed by John Bowlby, was originally about infant-parent bonds. But its mechanisms apply to any relationship where someone becomes a secure base for you, a person whose presence, real or imagined, regulates your emotional state. Once someone becomes an attachment figure, your brain grants them extraordinary power. They literally regulate your nervous system. Their presence calms you. Their absence distresses you. And your brain maintains a constant internal model of them, what Bowlby called an internal working model, that guides your behavior even when they're not around. These internal models don't dissolve when the person leaves. An infant whose mother walks into another room doesn't delete their representation of her. They hold her in mind, and that internal representation soothes them until she returns. But what happens when she never returns? The attachment system goes into crisis. It doesn't have an off switch. It was built on the assumption that attachment figures, once established, remain accessible. When they're not, through death, abandonment, or separation, the system keeps running anyway, generating increasing distress signals in hopes of motivating reunion behavior. This is why grief feels so physically intolerable. Your attachment system is essentially screaming at you to go find this person, even when you consciously know it's impossible. And this is why people long dead can still feel present. Your brain never deleted their internal working model. It's still there, still active, still influencing how you navigate the world. Now we enter perhaps the most unsettling territory. What happens when a person isn't just connected to you, but becomes structurally integrated into your very sense of self? There's a concept in social psychology called identity fusion, the phenomenon where the boundary between your personal identity and your social identity blurs or disappears entirely. Most of the time, you maintain a relatively clear distinction between me and we. You know who you are as an individual, separate from your relationships. But with certain people, romantic partners, best friends, family members, mentors, something different happens. You start defining yourself in relation to them. Your goals become intertwined. Your memories become shared narratives. When you think about who you are, they're part of the definition. Think about how couples often develop shared interests, shared friend groups, shared routines, to the point where they almost function as a single unit. Think about how identical twins sometimes report feeling incomplete without each other. Think about how soldiers in combat units will sacrifice their lives for their squad. This is identity fusion. And neuroscience is beginning to reveal its physical basis. Research using fMRI shows that when people think about deeply fused relationships, they show similar neural activation patterns whether thinking about themselves or thinking about the other person. The brain regions that typically distinguish self from other, particularly the medial prefrontal cortex, show reduced differentiation. In other words, your brain literally processes a deeply fused person as part of you. This creates beautiful intimacy when the person is present. But it creates psychological catastrophe when they leave. Because when someone who's fused with your identity disappears, they don't just leave your life, they tear a piece of your identity with them. You experience what psychologists call identity disruption. Suddenly the answer to "who am I?" becomes unclear. You were someone's partner and now you're what? You were someone's child and now they're gone, so what does that make you? You built your sense of self around this relationship, and now you have to reconstruct your entire identity without them. This is why breakups after long relationships feel like you're becoming a different person. It's not metaphorical. Your actual self-concept is fragmenting and reassembling. And here's where the neuroscience becomes almost haunting. When your identity is disrupted, your brain often clings to the old identity as a form of psychological preservation. It's easier, more cognitively efficient, to keep the old identity structure and maintain the person as an active presence in your mental world than to undergo the massive cognitive work of rebuilding your self-concept from scratch. So your brain chooses the path of least resistance. It keeps them alive in your head. You continue internal conversations with them. You imagine what they would think about your decisions. You maintain behaviors that were part of your we, even though there is no more we. You unconsciously preserve the fused identity because dismantling it feels like psychological death. This is why widows sometimes set a place at the table for their deceased spouse. Why people keep asking themselves what would they do years after someone's gone. Why you might still think, we should go there sometime, about someone you haven't spoken to in 5 years. Your identity structure still includes them, so your brain keeps generating thoughts and behaviors that match that structure. But there's an even deeper layer to this. Psychologist William James proposed that the self isn't a singular thing. It's multiple selves across different contexts. You're a different self at work versus at home versus with your parents versus with your best friend. What this means is that certain people become the key that unlocks specific versions of yourself. Your college friends bring out a version of you that nobody else does. Your first love knew a version of you that no longer exists anywhere else. When these people leave, they take those versions of you with them. There's a part of yourself you can only access in their presence. A way of laughing, a set of inside jokes, a feeling of being understood in a particular way. And when they're gone, that version of you gets buried alive. It still exists somewhere in your neural architecture, but it has no way to express itself. No one else knows that version of you. No one else brings it out. And so it haunts you, an entire dimension of your identity locked away because the only person who held the key has left. This is why running into an old friend after years can feel so surreal. They still have the key. Suddenly, a part of you that's been dormant for a decade comes rushing back. You laugh the same way. You reference things no one else would understand. You feel like yourself in a way you'd forgotten was possible. And when they leave again, that self gets buried once more. Now let's get into something that sounds like science fiction but is cutting-edge neuroscience. Your brain doesn't experience reality directly. It constantly hallucinates predictions about reality and then checks those predictions against sensory input. This theory, called predictive processing or the Bayesian brain hypothesis, fundamentally changes how we understand consciousness. Your brain is essentially a prediction machine, constantly generating hypotheses about what's happening in the world based on past experience. When you walk into a familiar room, you don't actually process every object consciously. Your brain predicts what should be there based on memory, and as long as sensory input matches the prediction, you experience the prediction, not the raw reality. This is why you can see a friend in a crowd who turns out to be a stranger. Your brain predicted your friend would be there, maybe you're meeting them, generated a perceptual hallucination of your friend, and it took actual sensory input a moment to correct the prediction. Now here's the unsettling part. Your brain builds incredibly detailed predictive models of important people in your life. It learns to predict their voice, their reactions, their emotional patterns, their opinions, their presence in certain contexts. These models are so sophisticated that they can run autonomously, generating realistic simulations of the person even when they're not there. This is why you can have entire conversations with people in your head. It's not just you talking to yourself. It's your brain running its predictive model of them, generating dialogue and reactions that match their patterns. The model is so good that it genuinely surprises you sometimes, saying things you weren't consciously thinking. This capability evolved for good reasons. Being able to simulate other minds, to predict what they're thinking, feeling, and planning, is crucial for social navigation. It's called theory of mind, and it's one of humanity's most powerful cognitive abilities. But when someone important leaves your life, their predictive model doesn't shut down. Your brain has invested enormous computational resources into this model. It's been refined through thousands of interactions. And prediction models, once built, tend to keep running unless actively suppressed, which requires cognitive effort that your brain would rather not spend. So the model keeps running. In quiet moments, your brain spontaneously generates predictions about this person. What they're doing right now. How they'd react to something you just experienced. What they'd say about your current situation. These aren't just memories, they're active simulations. Your brain is literally hallucinating their presence, their voice, their perspective. And because these predictions are based on thousands of real interactions, they feel authentic. The simulated conversation in your head genuinely sounds like them. The imagined reaction matches their patterns. Your brain has essentially created a ghost, a neural phantom that walks through your mental landscape with startling realism. This is why people who've lost someone sometimes report feeling their presence. Not in a supernatural sense, in a neuroscientific one. Their brain's predictive model of that person is so detailed and so active that it generates conscious experiences of their presence without any external stimulus. You hear their voice commenting on your day. You feel their presence in their favorite chair. You know what they'd say about something even though they're not there to say it. Neuroscientist Anil Seth calls consciousness a controlled hallucination. You're always experiencing your brain's best guess about reality, refined by sensory input. When someone's been deeply encoded into your predictive model of the world, they become part of your controlled hallucination even when they're objectively absent. But here's where this gets philosophically disturbing. How do you know the version of them in your head is accurate? Predictive models drift over time, especially without new input to correct them. Every time you remember someone, you don't retrieve a static recording. You reconstruct the memory, and each reconstruction can introduce subtle changes. The person living in your head has been frozen at the moment of departure. They don't age. They don't change. They don't grow. Meanwhile, the real person, if they're still alive, continues evolving, having experiences you're not part of, becoming someone potentially very different from who they were. The ghost in your neural network is not them. It's a fiction your brain created based on who they used to be, filtered through your emotional needs and biases. And yet, this fiction has power. It influences your choices. It shapes your relationships with new people, who often get unfairly compared to the ghost. It affects your emotional regulation and self-concept. You're essentially in a relationship with a hallucination, a predictive model running on outdated data, and treating it as real. Let me tell you about Maya. Maya fell in love when she was 24. His name was Alex. They met in graduate school, bonded over late-night research sessions, and shared dreams of changing the world. They were together for 4 years. They talked about marriage. They planned a future. And then Alex got a job offer across the country. They tried long distance for 6 months, but the strain was too much. The conversations became shorter. The visits less frequent. Eventually they had the talk. It was amicable. They both cried. They agreed they'd always care about each other. That was 8 years ago. Maya is 36 now. She's had other relationships. She's built a successful career. She's genuinely happy with her life. But Alex never left. Not literally. She hasn't spoken to him in years. But he's still there in her head, vivid as ever. She catches herself thinking, Alex would love this when she visits a new art gallery. When she faces a difficult decision at work, she unconsciously asks herself, what would Alex say about this? When she dates someone new, there's always a quiet comparison happening. Alex would have. She doesn't want this. She's not pining for him. She doesn't want him back. And yet, she cannot evict him from her mind. What Maya doesn't realize is that she's experiencing every mechanism we've discussed. Her brain built dedicated neural pathways for Alex during those 4 years. The dopamine and oxytocin bonding carved highways through her neural architecture that remain intact years later. Their relationship ended amicably but without real closure. No betrayal to create narrative finality. No dramatic end to signal story over. Just a gradual fade. The Zeigarnik Effect in its purest form, an open loop her mind compulsively tries to close. During their relationship, Alex became fused with Maya's identity. She was Maya and Alex. They built a shared life, shared dreams, a shared way of seeing the world. When he left, she had to reconstruct her identity, but she never fully completed the work. Part of her self-concept still includes him. And her brain built a devastatingly accurate predictive model of Alex. She can simulate entire conversations with him. She knows his opinions on things he never actually commented on because her model of him is sophisticated enough to generate novel predictions. So Alex lives on as a neural ghost, a hallucination so detailed it feels real, influencing Maya's life from inside her own head. This is what it means when your brain holds on to people long after they're gone. They're not memories you choose to recall. They're active processes, woven into your neural architecture, running continuously beneath your conscious awareness. So what does all this mean? It means that you are never truly alone in your mind. Every person who has meaningfully touched your life leaves an imprint, a pattern, a pathway, a predictive model that continues influencing you long after they've physically left. It means that some percentage of your thoughts, decisions, and emotions aren't entirely yours. They're echoes of relationships past, neural residue of bonds that once were. It means that the pain of losing someone isn't weakness or inability to move on. It's the inevitable consequence of your brain doing exactly what it evolved to do. Encode important people so deeply that removing them is neurologically similar to removing a piece of yourself. But here's the disturbing question that emerges from all of this. If your brain is constantly hallucinating the presence of people who are gone, how do you know which of your thoughts are truly yours? When you imagine what your deceased parent would think about your life choices, is that wisdom, or is it your own anxieties projected onto a comforting phantom? When you can't stop thinking about an ex, is that genuine unresolved feeling? Or is it just your brain's prediction error system misfiring because the story felt incomplete? When you make a decision based on what they would have wanted, are you honoring their memory, or are you letting a hallucination control your life? And perhaps most unsettling, do you even want them to leave? Because as much as it hurts to carry these ghosts, they're also proof that the relationship mattered. They're proof that you're capable of profound connection. They're proof that you loved someone enough that your brain physically restructured itself around them. Maybe the pain of holding on is preferable to the emptiness of forgetting. Maybe these neural ghosts are the price we pay for having been truly close to someone. Maybe carrying them is how we honor the depth of what we shared. Or maybe, just maybe, we're biologically trapped, prisoners of neural mechanisms that made sense on the African savanna but now create modern suffering we can't escape. Your brain holds on to people long after they're gone because it has no other choice. It built them into your neural architecture. It made them part of your identity. It created sophisticated models that predict their presence, their voice, their influence. And it did all of this not to torture you, but because in the environment your ancestors lived in, maintaining strong social bonds across time and space was the difference between survival and death. You are experiencing the consequences of being a deeply social species equipped with powerful memory and predictive processing, living in a world of unprecedented social fluidity and connection. The people living in your head aren't really there. But the patterns they left behind, the neural pathways, the identity structures, the predictive models, those are very, very real. They shape your present even from the past. They influence your future from inside your memories. So what do you do with this information? Maybe you start recognizing these ghosts for what they are, not mystical hauntings but neuroscience, not character flaws but biology. Maybe you develop compassion for yourself when you can't stop thinking about someone, recognizing that you're not weak, you're just human, experiencing the inevitable consequences of human connection. Maybe you deliberately update those old models. Consciously reflect on who that person really was versus who your brain has turned them into. Recognize that the version in your head has diverged from reality, and perhaps that recognition creates just enough distance to breathe. Maybe you accept that they're part of you now, neither fully present nor fully absent, but somewhere in between, neural patterns that fire on quiet nights, in familiar places, when you smell that particular cologne. Maybe you even learn to be grateful for the ghosts, because they're proof that you lived, that you loved, that you connected so deeply with another consciousness that your brain literally changed its structure to accommodate them. The people we hold on to are the people who changed us. And maybe that's the secret meaning hidden in all this neuroscience and psychology and evolutionary biology. You never truly lose anyone who changes you. They become part of how you see the world, part of how you think, part of the very neural substrate that generates your consciousness. They're gone, but they're not gone. They left, but they never left. They're absent, but they remain. You are, in a very literal sense, a living memorial to everyone who has ever mattered to you. And your brain will hold them tightly, tenderly, impossibly, long after they're gone.